Well, welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or potentially good evening, depending on where you're joining us from today. We're really excited that you've joined our Career Month Office Hour event. We have an outstanding panel lined up for you today, and it promises really to be a very rewarding event for all of you. Before we get kicked off, a couple of housekeeping items. One is some of you may have noticed that currently for this particular WebEx, your chat, I apologize, your audio and your video have been deactivated. However, we will be taking questions from you who have joined. We will be going through our panel discussion and then we'll move into a Q&A session. So we invite you to put your questions into the Q&A. They're visible to all of our hosts and panelists, and we'll be jumping into that a little bit later in the session. So I'll pass it to the 10,000 Coffees CEO and co-founder, Dave Wilkin, to kick us off.
Great. Well, welcome everyone. We've got such a great panel. So I'm going to try to speak as little as possible so I can start to rapid fire questions at these panelists to get as much information as possible for all of you. Most of you know 10,000 Coffees powers networking, career conversations, and mentoring programs at over 200 organizations around the world. Organizations like Adidas and many others to help people get those career conversations that are so important to everyone's success. And today, the goal is to do it through our office hours feature, which all of you have joined, to be able to have a group conversation with leaders that have probably met with more students and recent grads than anyone on this call collectively. And they've been able to talk with people from engineering to marketing to design, all different types of backgrounds. And so the goal of today is to be able to learn as much as we can about acing interviews, landing dream jobs, getting our foot in the door, and just demystifying a lot of things that can sometimes be a bit challenging as we're in our studies or about to graduate or recently graduated. And so we've got 4 experts here that are here just to help us and just to give us the insights and learnings that can help us all leave this hour or so with more confidence and more ideas on how we go and start our next step. I've got a bunch of questions that I have lined up, but all of you will have an opportunity for questions as well. WebEx allows you to ask questions directly to the panelists. So if you look at the bottom right of your WebEx, you'll see a chat and you'll be able to just put your questions in there. I'm going to do my best to try to get to as many of them as possible, but feel free to just drop them in there at any point. What I'll also share is that you can share any questions or thoughts or screenshots using our social handles, and we'll be looking out for those as well. But without further ado, why don't we jump into our panel, and maybe we'll kick things off and get each panelist to do kind of an introduction and just a little bit about your role and what you do in your spare time. So maybe I'll start with Ronald. Maybe you could break the ice for us and I'll let you popcorn to the next panelist.
Thank you, Dave. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon or good evening, whatever time zone you're in. Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here. So my name is Ronald Peters. I am the Senior Consultant for Diversity and Inclusion at the City of Toronto. And basically what I do and my team does, we support, talent strategies and initiatives to attract diverse talent into the organization. And that could be either student or professional non-student talent. So yeah, do a lot of things in the community, engaging with people, pipelining, meetings. I meet a lot of students for coffee, go to events in the community. I was just mentioning before this event started, I just came from a workshop helping some individuals in the Indigenous community, talking about office etiquette and how to apply to roles at the City of Toronto. So that's what I do. That's what my team does. In my spare time, I'm very much a homebody, so I love movies. I love, especially old movies, black and white movies. I've even dabbled in some silent movies. If anybody's a Charlie Chaplin fan, he is the guy. So that's just me in a nutshell. I will pass it over to Brendan.
Thank you so much, Ronald. Appreciate it. Hey, everybody. Happy Thursday. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Brendan Streif, and I lead the global early careers recruiting effort for Expedia Group. So my team globally hires interns, graduates, as well as apprentices into Expedia Group. Historically, we primarily focused on technical roles, but have also hired sales and marketing roles in the past, as well as product management, program management. And they're going to continue to expand those roles into design, sales, and really across the company. It's hiring students, hiring early in career talent is becoming a very big, bigger initiative for Expedia Group. So really excited to be here with y'all today. What I like doing in my spare time, I love to cook. So spend a lot of time outside of the barbecue. And I love to read. I've just recently started doing it again, which I'm really excited about. Mostly fiction. But yeah, I'm really excited to be here with y'all today. Yep. And so I will pass it off to Vicky.
Thank you, Brendan. Hi, everyone. It's really great to be here. My name is Vicky Ng. I work at Adidas as the interim director for global early career talent acquisition. I am a Canadian, born and raised in Vancouver. I went to UBC and started off my career at Adidas as an intern at our global headquarters in Germany. So I'm kind of an Adidas baby, and I booked a one-way flight from Vancouver to Germany to do my internship, and was really determined to stay with the company. So still here I am 12 years later. Our team is responsible for early career talent recruiting. So we are looking at how do we partner with universities, how do we bring in innovations such as 10,000 Coffees, how do we partner with associations and find different ways to engage with students and early career talent. We're also running our internship program. We have our global headquarters, as I mentioned, in Germany, in a town called Herzogenaurach. That's where many of our opportunities are. We also have our North America headquarters in Portland, Oregon, which is where I'm currently based, and then also across the world. And then in terms of a little bit about myself, I run a food blog on the side, Food Belly PDX, with my sister. We're big foodies coming from Vancouver, and Portland's also quite a foodie town too. So that's what I like to do on the side. I have a 2-year-old daughter, so she keeps me busy. And if I have time, I like to go snowboarding and play some ultimate frisbee. And then I will pass off to Michelle.
Great. Thanks so much, Vicki. Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here, part of this panel today, and these awesome group of panelists, and excited to share some thoughts and ideas with everyone. So my name is Michelle Reyes. I am the Senior Manager for Talent Acquisition Campus Strategy at the Loblaw Group of Companies. So my role, or my team, manages all of our co-op internship student hiring at Loblaw across all the banners of Loblaw. So a little bit like Brendan, we focus a little more on the STEM roles to start, but definitely expanding on the different roles within Loblaw, and again across all banners of Loblaw, including Shoppers Drug Mart. For those of you who are Canadian and know sort of the different banners under the Loblaw brand. So it's very exciting. We're growing. So many opportunities that have come up with campus as well. I think some of the messaging you've heard already is that the appetite for early talent and students coming into these organizations, it's awesome. So I think we're in a really good spot. My background actually is from higher education. So prior to joining Loblaw, I spent about 15 years in higher education working at 2 universities in Ontario. So my passion has always been working with students and helping to coach and provide that background. So really looking forward to sharing some of those messages today. And in my spare time, kind of like Vicki, I have little ones that keep me busy. So that's kind of when I think about what do I do in my spare time, that definitely keeps me busy. But when I have me time, definitely I like to, I've recently got, the pandemic has helped me get into some road cycling, which is awesome. So I found a new hobby doing that. But very excited to get back into traveling. So that's what I'm hoping that I can start going back into doing very soon. So yeah, really excited to be here. And again, thank you, Dave, for the invitation.
It's great to have everybody. So if it's not obvious yet to all the participants, we've got people who have hired and have been in the trenches, and let's use this next hour to pick their brains and dive into the good, the bad, the things we can learn from, so that ultimately when we leave this conversation today, we're just a step ahead. And just before I jump into my first question, I just also want to give a shout out to Denise and Elliot from the 10,000 Coffees team, who are also on this and work with all of our universities and colleges to help them bring the best in class mentoring and career networking solutions and help make this event possible. So thanks to them for joining and making sure that this is running smoothly, knock on wood. So just to jump into the first question, and maybe Brendan, you can, this is just one question for you, and then I'll hop into the next one. Can you just explain to everyone here what is early career, and what does it mean, and like what do all you do, and why does that matter to students? But tell us what that's all about.
Yeah, so when we say early in career, we are talking about anyone really approaching their first opportunity in career. And so when I talk to the business, it primarily focuses around students leaving a undergraduate program. However, more and more we are talking with the business about planning even further and further back into somebody's educational career. So how do we create opportunities with folks maybe who are leaving secondary school, so high school, and giving them the on-road to a career with Expedia that doesn't necessarily require that they've been to a four-year university. And then pertaining to those roles where we do look for them to have, students to have some experience with a four-year degree. How do we engage earlier in that degree program? So we actually have a program we piloted this year. It's very, very small, just a couple of students, but giving internship opportunities coming out of high school. So when we talk about early in career, we mean really early in career, really looking to create that on-ramp into someone's career here at Expedia Group, starting with Expedia Group. The business asks us, pretty regularly to engage with and talk about graduate, MBA hiring, that kind of thing. We do a little bit of PhD hiring as well. But again, all of that's really focused around someone's on-ramp into their career. So I hope that's sufficient, but yeah. Oh, Dave, I think you're muted. I can't hear you.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Thanks for that. And it's a helpful context, because I think for students and recent grads, the early career professionals are really here to help you think about what your next step can be. And it's a really friendly kind of first step into what might be a daunting world of jobs and work. So maybe to kick things off, interviews can be tough, and a lot of people may have never actually had an interview before. What's been like just an anecdote or a story of an interview that you remember as being like a really great job? Like somebody that's done a really great approach, or they've done something that really stood out. Like what would be an example of that? Maybe Vicky, we can start with you first. This question will actually get all of our panelists to answer it. But Vicky, would love just to share, like, what's one thing where you're like, wow, that was awesome, and we'll popcorn to the next.
All right, Dave, you kind of tripped us up, because in the notes you said what's a bad or a great interview experience. So I just had like a bad one lined up for this answer, but I can also answer the question you had. The one that I remember that's most memorable is, I work at Adidas, and when we used to do in-person interviews, sometimes we would get people showing up in Nike or other competitor products, and we had to tell them, like, that's not okay, like we get that, like, in your side life, like, that's what you do, but you're here to interview. And so that's more of a memorable one. I think in terms of standouts, I would say someone who's really done the research and prepared, and you can tell that this is something that they want. Motivation is probably, I think, the best indicator of success for role, and they need to show that through preparation and research before showing up to the interview.
Awesome. I'll let you popcorn.
Oh, sorry, popcorn. I'm going to popcorn it to Ronald.
Yes. Yeah, I've been involved in a lot of different interviews, but a couple those that really stood out is when the candidate, of course, is very confident coming in, but they turn the the interview and the question and answer session sort of into a conversation, right? And it just sort of flows naturally, and it sort of exudes confidence that the whole panel could feel that, and they become memorable in our minds. So those are the kind of things that really stick out, and then having really great questions to ask us. Usually, at least for those interviews that I've been on, we're asking you the questions all the time, but then you usually get to a point where the interviewer says, "Okay, that's all the questions I have. Do you have any questions for me?" And please, under no circumstance should you not have a question. Okay. uh, Funny, and I always reference this point because I'm going to share my own embarrassing story. When I did one of my first interviews when I came to Canada, I was so nervous in that interview, so that when they reached that stage, I wanted to get out of that room so bad. So they asked, "Oh, do you have any questions?" I'm like, no, I think you covered everything. Thank you. And I was just out there, and I just felt it went bad. So I always remember that. So whenever I hear candidates asking questions, it triggers, it's a positive trigger for me, but I know it also helps to make you memorable in the eyes of the interviewers. Oh, and I will pass it over to Brendan.
Yeah, to me, it's asking questions. So we hear this from our engineering interviewers all the time. It's the thing I tell my team as we're coaching them and working with our engineers who are interviewing. The thing that stands out is most of the students have a decent technical background who we interview and can get through some of the technical questions, but the students that really stand out are the ones who ask questions before they even get in to start answering. And I think that goes, I've just hired a bunch of folks into my team, and that resonates on our team as well. So it can be as simple as, and it usually helps you to calm down as well, because I want to acknowledge everyone on this call. In likely most cases, your first interview or one of your first that you'll be heading into, or you've just recently done. It's okay to be nervous. You're not perfect. We don't expect you to be. None of us are. And so the best thing for you is to repeat the question in the way you're thinking about it, right? So I heard you say, it's a great way to show up. And then the thing that really seems to set candidates apart is their ability to problem solve. And so that's where the engagement with your interviewer is really important, because no one problem solves truly by themselves. We do it collaboratively, and that's how the best teams operate. So yeah, that would be my recommendation. Oh, and I'll Michelle,
Yeah.
go for it, Dave.
Thanks, Brendan. Yeah, I think I'm going to echo all the points, but I will share an embarrassing story as well, just so that Ronald doesn't feel he's the only one. So early in my career, I actually myself went through a co-op program in my undergraduate degree and was learning all about interviews, going through my first interviews. And I had an interviewer who was clearly dozing off in the interview. And I thought to myself, I said, okay, so I had to take a pause, because I thought, okay, like I you feel, you don't know, is it me, is it you, that sort of thing. But I actually started to realize, and I realized this later as I go through future interviews and I've been coaching students, I was very rehearsed in my interview going into that interview. And so, to Ronald's point, and to Brendan's point, a bit more of a conversation, right? And so I find that some of the interviews, and to Brendan's point, if it's, it's okay to be nervous, but I think a lot of it is also your mindset going into the interview. If you understand that it really is more like a conversation. I know a lot of students feel like it's a one-way street, that the interviewer is just there to interview you. But as was said earlier, asking questions back is so important. So remember that you are also asking questions for you to make an educated decision. So I think it's important to just recognize that. And if you approach it more like a conversation versus feeling that it has to be very rehearsed, because I know and we'll probably talk about this today, that, there are best practices and structure when you're answering questions and things like that. But it is a little bit of that balance of making it seem more conversational versus a script that you're following, and hopefully, not putting the interviewer to sleep like I probably did.
No, those are great. And I wanted to start with some positivity in terms of what things went well, because I think, unfortunately, a lot of people don't get the advice that we're going to get in this next hour. And so interviews can go a little sideways. Vicky shared a couple examples, like, know who you're interviewing with, and make sure if it's a brand, you're representing, your passion and and where their things. And we've heard that, with Pepsi and Coca-Cola, where you show up with the wrong brand. Does anyone else have kind of some funny or lighthearted maybe fails that we could all learn about and just make sure that we don't do those things?
Maybe not so much for interviews, Dave, but I would echo Vicky more from an application perspective. I've been on the receiving end of resumes and cover letters that have totally different company names on them, and you could tell they've just been sort of recycled through. Which again, that we think about the resume and the interview. I know we'll talk a little bit about that potentially, but leading to an interview. So, kind of looking at the resume and seeing something different, I think just one of those things to also be aware of in terms of making sure it's on point.
Yeah. Plus one, Michelle, I think that's one that stands out to me is the super applicant is the one who takes the time to research and customizes the resume. That is absolutely the best practice. If you're not able to do that because you're time constrained or whatever your situation may be, at least make sure your cover letter is tuned a little bit and does not have the same company name as the last company you applied. That's a surefire sort of way to at least make a bad impression, if not get turned away. So yeah, it's the little things, I think, in some cases.
If I may just add, talking about little things, it's not something that happens very often, and I don't know what might cause it to happen, but on your cover letter and resume, also, please make sure that you have the correct phone number. I don't know, you might change your phone or something happen and you have a new number. On more than one occasion, I've called someone to invite them for interview and the phone was out of order. So I couldn't have reached the person. So again, just a minor thing, but it could really make you miss your time to shine.
All great examples. And so maybe the next question, I'll pass it to Michelle first and then to Vicky. So what are employers looking for in students and recent grad candidates today? And what role do resumes play to make the first impression a positive one?
Yeah, for sure. So, I touched on a little bit, Dave, right, from the application process. And I think, one of the things to remember is, so from an employer perspective, a recruiter, hiring manager, right, your resume is really our first introduction to you as a candidate. And so, to everyone's point so far, right, these little things, you want to make sure, because they are 100% in your control. Right? They're in your control when you're sending your application, your resume, cover letter. So, wanting to make sure that it is accurate and it's presenting, you in the best light. So, I think resumes and cover letters, as employers and recruiters, we've gone through this process. We know what to look for. So there are things that we look for. And so, it's not just necessarily about having certain words on your resume. It is, again, that little attention to detail, in terms of writing and your communication skills, things like that. So, so resumes are important from that perspective because it is a first impression. Now, again, we know and we understand, to Brendan's point, time constraints and applying, things like that. So, so we do take that into consideration, but it is the first point of contact that we really have with you. So I think it's important to make sure that you are, especially if it's, something, a role that you're really keen on and there's a lot of interest there. Sometimes it is prioritizing a little bit, right? And making sure that you focus on those roles. In terms of what we're looking for, I think that's a lot that we can talk about there, but I in general would just say, my best advice really is to think about the role that you're applying for, right? So, I've often told students, like, sometimes you might have not just one resume, you might have two resumes, depending on the role that you're applying for. But at the end of the day, I know this is a stat that's usually shared around, but it's kind of true. And my panelists, please feel free to agree or disagree, but like maybe 20 to 30 seconds to look at a resume really quickly and just, to be able, so you want to be able to catch their attention quickly. And so, I always talk about making sure that relevant things are top of mind on your resume, that you're highlighting things that can speak to the role that you're applying to or the company that you're applying to, right? It doesn't even have to be about the role, but I'll use Loblaw just as an example. Maybe you have retail experience. It doesn't have to be at Loblaw, but you have retail experience. So leverage some of that experience when you talk about it in your resume. So that would be just one of those things I'd say. It's really just understanding, who the reader is, right? Who's reading your resume and what can you include that will really capture their attention. But I'll pass it on to Vicki as well.
Thank you, Michelle. So many great things that I'm also going to add on to, but
We might have lost. I know Vicki was saying that she had some Wi-Fi.
Sorry, are you able to hear me now? No. Hello? Yes?
It's a little,
yes.
Maybe try one more time.
Okay. I was just saying that it's an employee market right now. Are you able to hear me okay?
Vicki, it's cutting out just a little bit, I think. So I don't know if Brendan, do you want to jump in? All good. And feel free to turn your video off. It might help. But Brendan, do you want to share your thoughts on this, and then we'll pass the next question to Vicki and Ronald.
Yeah, I was just going to say, the resume is key. I think, as we've shifted more virtually, Expedia, we've been doing a lot of high volume. We've had a very high volume of applicants for a number of years, which is great for us. But from a candidate perspective, you need to understand when you're applying to a company that has it's a big company, has a lot of applicants, even more so to Michelle's point. If we're even getting the chance to review your resume, it's very quick. We're only going to look at it very quickly. What we've tried to do is actually bring more people through our process so that we can look at them from a technical perspective and bypass the resume. So actually resume is becoming less important from that perspective. But that's a perspective of one company. And I think, to Michelle's point, I think it's a great idea to have multiple resumes. So if I'm applying to a startup where there might be one recruiter, there might be 10 roles, they probably don't have as many applicants. You definitely need to put more time and effort into that. I think somebody asked in the chat about cover letters too. I think you have to sort of understand your audience, to what Michelle was saying, is if you're applying to a big company, then there's a chance that they probably are going to try to move you along and get more data on you in order to make the decision. Whereas a smaller company might engage with you a little bit more upfront. We're all trying to do better, especially as we move more digital and virtually. So thank you for your patience with us as we learn along with it. And yeah, that would be my addition to that.
That's great. And when you think about the role of the resume, I think other than the resume, like what are the best ways, if there's a couple things that everybody that's here could do to land their first interview, what are some of those best ways? And maybe we'll go Ronald first and then pass it back to Vicki.
I'm wondering, outside of the resume, again, because I'm in a large organization, so the resume is that, there's not much touch points where a recruiter might, we're not on campus all the time. Yes, we do go on campus, but the resume is still that major piece that our recruiters use. So I just stick to that a little bit, but just to add some more onto what was said before about the resume. Your resume is your marketing document, okay? That's you marketing yourself. You have to be able to tell a cohesive story on your resume. Your resume is a story. It's just storytelling. And I know we estimated 20, 30 seconds. I heard it's like maybe about 15 seconds at this point in terms of reviewing resumes. So what does that mean? I'm talking a little tactical here now. Is that first half of your first page of your resume, where you have your profile or your objective statement, and then maybe you're going to list your skills, make sure it is all interconnected. Make sure that you are telling that story. And you want to make sure that your academic experience as well as your work experience, and I'm including volunteer work here as well. All right, for those who are new and think that it wouldn't be possible, put your volunteer experience as well. You want to make sure to show those linkages, all right, to the role that you're applying for. So again, yeah, it's still the resume for my world. That is sort of the main driver, but you've got to tell me a really tight story. And oh, bullet points, please use bullet points when you're describing your experience and stuff. Simple bullet points is good. Paragraphs that are long and meandering does not go. Again, you don't want to give the recruiter an excuse to pass your resume by. If a recruiter opens up a resume and it just seems a little dense, they might pass it by. But bullet points is easy. It helps to focus the eye, focus the mind. So bullet points. I'm a big fan of bullet points. Pass it to Vicky.
To add to that, Ronald, not only bullet points, but like you should have a lot of bullet points, not just 2 bullet points with, half a sentence in there. What I wanted to say was help us help you, right? We want to hire you, but your resume is really the only and the best tool for us to understand who you are. And so you really need to add a level of detail in your resume. And I think Michelle said 20 seconds. I think the number I heard was 6 seconds that recruiters spend looking at a CV. And that's probably true for high volume jobs such as internships. We get, 500 plus applicants. We have to be able to make decisions really quickly. And so if you can help us help you in terms of thinking about who do I want to convey myself as to the recruiter and how do I present this in the resume, that would be really helpful. So for example, you might not think you have a lot, but as Ronald mentioned, it's all about storytelling, right? Let's say you have a babysitting job or you work as a cashier or something. These are all like really critical skill sets that you gain in these type of work that you can spell out in your resume. Yeah, like managed, resolved conflicts with customers and proposed new solutions for, resolution or something like that. Or took initiative to set a schedule and whatever that is. You can wordsmith whatever it is that you've done to make it, and really highlight that out in your resume, and that will help us. So if you look at a job description, right, or an internship posting, and you see a lot around project management or communication skills or being data driven, make sure you highlight that from your previous job or volunteer experiences in your resume in those many bullet points in your CV. And I also share that at Adidas, we also want to look beyond the resume. So if you're applying for one of our internships, we also ask you to complete an Adidas one-pager. So instead of submitting a cover letter, which most people will just replace it, the company's name, we're asking you to show us who you are and what impossible is nothing means to you. So that can be a video, it could be a link, it could be an essay, it could be a collage, it could be what we've seen TikTok videos, just for us to get to know you beyond the resume. And I think that's one of the most important things, to come across as authentic and unique in the application process. And I would also agree with Ronald that the resume is the best way to be seen. You can make those connections with the recruiters, which is also great, but don't discount yourself if you haven't been able to meet any recruiters or you don't know anyone in the company. I get referrals all the time, and I always tell them to apply directly because that's the best way to be seen by the recruiter. I can forward that on to someone else and be like, this person's great. And that recruiter has 1,000 emails and they're just focused on, looking through the applications themselves. So
that's a really good, and everybody that's on this has access to the networking programs at their school to meet with alumni and to meet with career professionals through their 10,000 Coffees licenses. And to Vicky's point, I think a lot of times go and have those conversations and those coffees with people to practice your skills and to get comfortable having those conversations, and to get to know best practices so that when you do put your resume in the stack with people like Vicky or anybody on this call, you have some more context for what your bullet points, like Ronald shared, should say. And so the more that you can go and network and build with people, you're kind of piecing together a puzzle so that your resume has the right bullet points, your talk tracks and what you're going to say in your interviews are ready. So you'll start to see how networking, although it might not be really obvious in some cases, when you have those different experiences, you're building the perspectives and the fundamentals to help you get your resume to say the right things and then show up to that interview with the right thoughts. I'm going to open it up to the first question from the audience, and maybe we'll go to Michelle and then to Brendan on this one. What are some of the key information that people should be looking for or researching in advance of an interview?
Yeah, I can kick it off, Brandon. So I think so interesting. I'm going to take it a step back, actually, that in terms of the research piece, because I actually think the research should start. And again, I know we talk about time constraints and things like that, but it really should start when you're preparing your cover letter, when you're preparing to apply, because so part of it is again, are you like the role that you're applying for? Dave, you actually talked about, the whole piece around reaching out to your network in 10,000 Coffees. Absolutely 100%, right? Have those conversations around and connect with people who are either in the industry or in the organization, and just ask questions about their experience, about their role. How did they get into the organization, right? What were some of those key factors that they felt helped help them move along, or helped influence their application? So I think the research needs to start well before the interview, actually, just in terms of thinking about the role. But going into the interview itself, though, yeah, I mean, absolutely. Some of the key things that I would recommend in terms of researching, again, kind of goes back to basic 101, but what Vicky said in her first answer, right? Like, what is the company? What is the brand? What are the other brands that might be associated with that organization? Like Loblaw, for example, is even me learning, coming into the organization relatively new, the brands and the banners under Loblaw is quite complex. So I could be applying for a particular team, and it may be focused on one particular banner or brand within that organization. So just making sure you understand some, sort of where that piece is. And then again, in today's day and age, again, you kind of said it too, Dave, there's a lot of resources out there for students right now, whether that be, again, direct connections with people at the organization, but just strictly what's online, right? As I know, as Loblaw, that's something we're trying to focus on, is just trying to give more information about who we are and what we do. And so there's lots of information that you can find there. And I actually find it, I know for some of the managers that I work with, it's a bit of an expectation, right? When students come in, to these interviews, is just having some of that foundational knowledge about the organization. But also, just to kind of going back to Ronald's point a bit earlier, it actually will help you form questions. So the more research that you could do and understand about the company, hopefully it becomes a catalyst for you to start forming those questions that you can ask, either about the role or about the company. So definitely, my big thing is looking at the role. How does that tie into the bigger organization? And then things like, as well, maybe what you're passionate about, right? So things around the culture, around different strategic initiatives that the company is doing or has been talked or is promoting, maybe asking some questions around that. But Brandon, I'll pop back to you and see if you have other things.
Yeah, I think that was really comprehensive. I think the two things I would add would be, from a huge + one to the research before you apply. It is, I think Vicky mentioned it. It is a applicant's market right now, and so it's not that you can't apply to multiple places, but I recommend that you look at the values. So the behavioral interview, so to speak, from an Expedia perspective, is focused around our values. So check in with the company's values. It's going to make you a lot happier employee if you align with those values. And then I think what Michelle is saying is do that double click to how are they putting those values into practice? What is their PR team saying on their website? What are you seeing on social media? That kind of thing. So at least that kind of double click I think is important. We then carry those values, as I mentioned, all the way through the interview. So if you have them in your resume, and then you have them, you talk to them, you use those experiences in your interview. And then also you can use that to form questions, as you mentioned. And that sort of has this through line, right, of being aligned to the values. That's really important. The other thing I would say is tactical. Again, we have a high volume of roles. We have a high volume of applicants. And so it can be about tactically doing well in an interview as well, especially at larger companies. So it is as easy as a Google search. And then I would say it's partnering with someone to do a little bit of prep. It's not to say that you should be an interviewing expert. It's your first or second or third maybe interview. But a little prep goes a long way. It goes a long way. And so I think, researching by way of, what are the most commonly asked questions for a marketing analyst, a graduate, or a software engineer? It's one of the things we talk to students all the time in interview prep. Well, what are the questions or what am I going to ask? And the answer is, I'm not going to ask anything that hasn't been asked before. No one's creating new questions. What I mean by that is an engineer, a software engineer, we all want you understand the basics. So go understand what that looks like from Google what that might be. And then make sure you really show up there, right? We have tend to have a hard time hiring folks if you don't have sort of the basics covered. So I think that's research you could do up front ahead of the interview that will really help you stand out.
Great add-ons. And I think a lot of times students and recent grads are told, just apply for jobs, and you're kind of sitting there on your computer just applying and applying and applying. And it can sometimes feel like, what can I possibly do to get ahead? What do you think what are some actions or things that students and recent grads can do other than just putting their resume on a job application as a way to get more opportunities or start to kind of build the foundations to be more successful in their next steps? Any things or activities that you think everyone should consider? I'll just open up to the panelists and feel free to kind of lightning between each other with some of those thoughts.
Can I just start off? I just want to build on something you just said. Sometimes you just keep applying to roles. I just want to say that could also hurt you. I'll just speak to the systems I see, and maybe everybody else could fill in. But when you apply to a role, the recruiter can see all the other roles that you're applying for. All right. So if you are, let's say, you're applying to marketing, if you're marketing is your passion, and you apply to a marketing role, when the recruiter goes in, if they see that, okay, you applied to my marketing role, but last week you applied to a finance role, then last week you applied to operations role the week before, it looks like confusion. So the recruiter is like, this person maybe doesn't know what they want. Now, I'm not saying you can't apply to multiple roles, but ideally, find a focus. So it may be a marketing assistant, social media analyst, things that are in the same orbit. You want to kind of stay in that lane. And the other thing, which might just contradict my first point, but don't just stick to titles, because sometimes your dream role may actually exist, but it has a different title. Always look at job descriptions. All right. I use it again. I use it my personal example. When I graduated from school, I wanted to get into marketing. I was not successful. But even when I got hired into the bank, I would look internally for marketing roles and I'll apply to them, but still wasn't getting it. But when I was looking into the diversity and inclusion role, my first job in diversity and inclusion department when I was in the bank, the role was not hard recruitment per se. It was about sourcing and community engagement and promoting the bank as an employer of choice. And here it was, I was actually finding the marketing activities which I was passionate about in a role that said recruitment specialist. So what I'm saying is, also don't stop at titles, look at job descriptions as well. I hope I just didn't confuse everybody with that.
So
But
Ronald, just as a question on that, just a lot of people don't know what visibility you have. How can you tell which roles everybody's applied to? Is that like what is that? How do you do that?
so every time you create a profile on our HR system, you have one profile. So if I click on your name, it takes me to your main profile. I have a list of all the jobs that you applied for. So you as a user, oh yeah, I'm just applying to 10 jobs. I on the other side, I see those 10 jobs in a row lined up. So and if I know if you applied last week or today. So it just again it's telling a story about you again. All right. It's
So
all
be
about
thoughtful.
perception.
It's a really good point for everyone because I think a lot of people don't realize that you have those systems, right? So be thoughtful with how you're putting your resume in. Maybe I'll open up to the other panelists to build on this.
Yeah, I was just going to add to what Ronald was just saying there, and that in larger companies, like we all represent, if your passion's marketing, there are recruitment marketing roles, there are marketing roles, there's social media roles. So it's not to don't apply to 10, it's apply to the right 10. Don't apply to an engineer. We get you want to work at Loblaw or Expedia or Adidas. Apply to the roles that really focus on your passion. Because I think I love Vicky's example. Might try to take it as the one pager. Is do something. Show us who you are, right? And what we're not looking for value fit or culture fit. We're looking for these culture additions, right? We're looking for these value additions. And so, I think it seems confusing if you're applying to things all over the place. The other thing is Dave, I like that you're calling out, wait, you guys have that kind of information on the back end? I'll give you an example. Be mindful, we have these systems that make our lives a little bit easier, but our lives are still difficult managing all the applications. So if you think we're working in Excel spreadsheets, stop and think how confusing that would be. And then imagine like how good the system could be. It's never that good. And so I'll give you an example. We've got our roles posted across different locations. You don't need to apply to every location. You don't need to do that. You just need to apply to one. It gets confusing to us. It's harder to manage when people sort of overlap. It's a lot more work. And then again, apply that Excel principle again. If I was doing that in Excel, how confusing do you think that would be? So these systems add a little bit of value, but be mindful of that, I'd say. Yeah. Vicky or Michelle?
I was just answering some of the questions that are in the chat because they're so good.
Why don't we? I'm trying to get through all the questions, but Vicky, maybe pick one question and we'll ask it to the
Okay,
panel.
here's a really good one from Navdeep. Okay, so he asked, let me just find it directly. So he asked, I have a question regarding the preferences of an interviewer. Would they pick a candidate with excellent grades but average soft skills, or a candidate with average grades but excellent soft skills? So I just responded to him and said, generally speaking, at least from Adidas, I'm not speaking for any other companies, we would go for average grades with excellent soft skills, because soft skills are what is going to get you ahead and be successful in your job. You need to collaborate, you need to communicate, you need to be effective with how you implement your work. And also from my grades, we don't look at GPA anymore at Adidas when looking at internships, because it can be quite subjective. Maybe you had to work 2 jobs, and you didn't have your education paid for, and your grades suffered because of that. And so it's not the best indicator whether or not someone's going to be successful in our company, unless you're doing a super technical role where you don't need to do have any soft skills. We're, at least at Adidas, we're going to lean on the soft skills over your grades, or even where you studied.
I would 100% echo everything that Vicky has said. I think I've had the fortunate experience of working with multiple different organizations when I was on the higher ed side. So I will say, just as an asterisk to Vicky sort of mentioned, it's not across the board. There are certain industries and certain roles where absolutely grades is a factor. But I would also caveat that to say that grades is one of the factors. So it's not necessarily the factor, it is one of the factors. When you think about recruitment, it is about looking at different layers and factors when we're looking at an ideal candidate. So oftentimes, if we need to funnel that down further, then grades usually become a factor. But for Loblaw, for example, and previous companies that I've personally been in, grades have not been at the forefront. And so I would echo, it would be more on that soft skill versus the grades piece. And I'll just sort of throw in there, Dave, I know back from that first question, like what else can you do that I think sort of ties into this a little bit. The soft skills, the grades, what Vicky had said about, how you communicate, how you problem solve, things like that. I think the one thing to remember, we've talked about work experience, and Vicky talked a little bit and highlighted the volunteer piece. But I will say, again, speaking for Loblaw and a company I was at previous to Loblaw who did a lot of campus recruitment, a lot of it is just application of your skills. So when you think about, so for example, student leadership, involvement on campus, participation. So for those of us, or for those of the students on the call right now who are in potentially some technical sort of STEM engineering type roles, these hackathons, right? Well, you don't even have to be in that background, but just participating in some sort of student challenge, student activity where you are applying the skills that you're learning. And at the same time, it also connects to maybe a passion project of yours. Those are the things that I would say would also add value to what you can do, what you can showcase on your resume, what you can talk about in an interview. So don't discount that. Don't dismiss that. I find, a lot of students as well do think that, well, it's not related, so I'm not going to talk about it, or I'm not going to put it on my resume. And then when I meet them and I talk to them, I'm telling them totally different. I said, no, like exactly what Vicky said in the babysitting example, right? Like think about what you were doing in that role, not that the title of the role or, all of those things, but what were you doing? What sort of skills were you showcasing? And I used to tell students this all the time, especially early talent and new grad, part of it is we as recruiters and those of us in early talent recruit because we know that you are early talent and new grads, right? We know you're not coming with 5 to 10 years of experience under your belt necessarily, right? So that's never the expectation. So it really is just understanding that, part of what we want to do is try to find you and help you in those roles that can teach you some maybe more of those foundational like the technical skills. But it's the softer skills that that we really want to see come through, and how can we help develop you as you grow in your career.
Some really great answers to that, Vicky. Thanks for jumping in. There's a lot of great questions. So I'm gonna hop to the next one, which is from Rihanna. What are some of the best responses you've encountered to the question, what is your greatest weakness? Maybe we'll go Brandon. Let's just do a lightning round across all of our panelists. We'll do Brandon to Vicky, to Ronald, to Michelle. What's the best answer to what's your greatest weakness?
So little quick anecdote. I had a student who we had recently hired do some mentorship of some students coming through our candidates coming through our funnel. And she was saying, this is one of those questions she just absolutely loves. She just absolutely loves this question. So in our process, we're not asking these questions. And here's the reason why, is that this has zero indication on how you're going to act as an employee. So it's not to pass judgment on that question so much. It's to say that I don't have a good answer for you because I don't know that I've ever asked it. And I would push back hard if somebody was trying to ask me to ask it. I think the best answer you could give there, and I'd love to hear what the rest of the panelists have to say, but is to not do it too overtly, in a bragging kind of way, but tie it into something, show how you took that weakness and you turned it into a strength, or you learned from it. and do that in a way of, the two good models would be STAR, so expressing the situation, task, and then the action and the result. And I would go back to your resume questions before too. Always put the results. So talk about the results. So if you have a weakness, I think be honest about it if that question comes up, but think about how that might apply to what you're learning, what you plan to learn. Were you able to turn it into something that you were growing into a strength? Maybe not, if it's a current weakness, it can't also be a strength, I guess. Maybe it can. But yeah, I'll stop there and divert to everybody else. But I think it's questionable interviewing, but an interesting question to get to know someone. So.
I agree with you, Brendan. I hate that question. We don't ask that question for that reason too. I hate when I'm asked it. But I think if you are asked it during an interview, it's a good opportunity to show how self-aware you are. Don't give away too much. There's no need to be kind of too thorough with this answer, but show, as Brendan was saying, give an example of, something that you could work on, and then show how you've put that into action. What's the plan? How are you kind of working on that? And then I would kind of turn that into strength too, just to be like, hey, I'm really focused on like self-development. So I constantly ask for feedback from my teammates, and this is some of the feedback that's come up. And so I'm doing this to address it. And in our next project, I got great feedback from the team afterwards, and you can turn that into like a good thing for the interviewer.
Vicky, I love that suggestion. I'm going to use that. Never ask that again. That's exactly what I'm going to use.
If you ever get asked that.
You know what? Like Vicky and Brendan, it's not a question I've asked or heard being asked, but I know it does come up in conversation all the time. And again, I'll echo the same response here as well. It's all about framing it, right? Yes, you're going to talk about the low point, but try to end it on a high point and frame it as something maybe in the past. Oh yeah, I used to be very bad at public speaking. It just was not one of my strong things. I was fairly shy, but I knew it was something I had to overcome. And I sort of put myself in situations. So I joined the debate club. I did this, I did that, and you know what? Over time, I just sort of built up my confidence and my competence with it. And and I think that's something I've been able to overcome. And leave it right there. Don't go into too much detail. Just keep it moving. That's just my idea. That's my plan to get out of it if I need to. But yeah, if it ever came up for me. But it's not something I come across very often.
And I'll just add, we don't really ask that either at Loblaw, and I would just echo everything that's absolutely been said. Same thing.
Yeah, that's and we've heard a lot. If those questions come up, I think that the most important thing is just to be honest and to be sincere in it. I think the worst thing you can say is just something that's not true or something that's not authentic to yourself. And so regardless of the questions that may come up here or there, just remember so many people, especially in early career, and I can say this because I get to know people like everyone on this panel, they really just want to get to know you, and they want to, I think it was Vicky that you said, they want to hire you and they want to hire great people. So being honest and sincere is better than making things up or being disingenuous in any way. So another question that came in, I'm going to paraphrase this one from Peter. So you are getting a couple internships. What are some of the best ways to potentially turn internship or internship type experiences into better jobs, into maybe full-time job opportunities? And Michelle, maybe we'll start with you because I know we'll go Michelle to Brandon because I know both of you are big on getting those kind of conversions to happen. So Michelle, over to you first.
Yeah, that's a great question, Dave. So yeah, I'll preface it to say that, I think, well, again, for Loblaw especially, part of the reason why, and I think that the panelists connect with this, part of the reason why we also, as an organization, strategically look at early talent and look at co-op and internship is to convert into full-time, right? We want to, from a talent strategy perspective, want to create some of those pipelines so that, we are constantly looking at that talent, bringing in new talent. I loved Brendan's comment around it's about culture add and value add. I'm going to take that from you, Brendan, that one. But so exactly that, right, is we want to continue that momentum. And so, we are focused on that. And sometimes, to be honest, I think it is a mix between, or my advice, I guess, from a student perspective is really to own that. Right. And so, there are opportunities, I think, we have internally that our managers and us as a campus team, we will identify, or we hear it, it comes to us through the managers or through HR, that sort of thing. But it's also not necessarily always within our visibility or in control. And so, anyways, at Loblaw, anyways, in my organization. So I think there's a bit of an element of also you as a student being in those roles to take ownership of that and to almost treat it, very similar to what we've already been talking about in terms of, making some of these connections while you are working, I think is one of the key things that I would share. I know this sort of overlying message we have around networking has come out already, but I would push that message while you are in an organization, right? And especially for those of you students who are just starting out in programs where you have maybe multiple co-op work terms, or even if you don't, right, if it's your first, foray, is to think about the complexity of the organization and to the point that was made earlier by Ronald, right? Like you could be in one department doing one thing, but it doesn't mean that there's not another department that does something similar and still touches marketing or, still touches, finance or whatever, right? So again, I can speak to Loblaw because of the complexity of our brands and our banners. We have roles that are quite similar, but they're reporting into different teams. They're touching on different product lines. We have sort of a digital side versus a non-digital side, right? So there's so many different avenues. And I think, again, it's a little bit about owning that and exploring that and having some of those conversations with your managers or having those conversations with campus because part of it too is that if they don't know your interest, we also can't affect change for you. So it's communicating what those interests are and passion and showing that curiosity, right? And I always tell students, the more people that know, then the more people can act as your cheerleaders and can help you. But if nobody knows, then nobody can help you. So that's sort of my advice, kind of blanket around that.
Yeah, I think the feedback I would give is if you're looking to, and Dave, correct me if I'm answering the question right, so keep me on track. But if you're looking to score the full-time role after your internship, the first thing to do is I would go back to what we were talking about research. There's so much great opportunity out there in the market to research if companies even offer conversions, intern conversion. In full transparency, we build our entire model based upon intern conversion. So I know how many students are going to accept our offers within a few percentage points. How many may back out? Don't do that, please. Not a good practice. And I'm going to build that into the model, meaning if we need to hire 100 students in 2023, in 2022, I'm going to hire about 150, let's say, right? So, and then we're going to look to convert as many as we can. And so I think if you're looking for that full-time role, that's the best place to start. Then when you're here, focus on, I would contradict Michelle a little bit in that I would focus on the work you're doing. We've had interns in the past who took the entire time to focus on networking. It was a disaster. You're there to do work. You're there for an output. If you don't get a good grade on that output, it doesn't matter who you got to know because the people making that decision are not gonna look favorably. So get your work done, but when you're doing that, as you're looking to gain experience or you're looking to get questions answered, don't be afraid to go out. If you're an engineer, go talk to product managers in your space to better understand the problem, right? These are the kinds of things that we would love to see. It's sort of the next level of problem solving, and you get to network while you're doing it. And I would agree with Michelle. The more people who know about you and have done great work with you, when it's time for that feedback, you'll just have more voices that are advocating for you, which is never a bad thing.
I would also echo what Brendan said, to do good work in your internship and focus on that. doing good work could be understanding more about the different functions you work with and learning about that and connecting the dots in your internship. But you won't believe it. Like we give this tip every year during intern orientation, and how bad it can come across if you do 500 coffee chats during, no, sorry, Dave, during your internship, and they still do it, you know? And those are the ones we don't end up hiring, unfortunately, because they spend so much time and effort trying to make a good impression to 500 people instead of just doing the work and good work and getting that recommendation from their team.
Yeah, and plus one, the coffee chats are only valuable if you can sell your work, right? So if your work isn't good, but you met with 500 people, I would argue that's not very valuable, right? Have 5 chats where you've been able to share exactly what kind of great outputs you've had. Now you have 5 people who understand the great work you've done. Yeah, please do good work, focus on good work, which actually it requires you work across other people. I think one of the big things that our managers say, the interns, the same thing that you tell the interns every year when they start, how do you be how are you successful? You're successful by not assuming you know everything or that we expect you to know everything, and don't expect that the team knows everything. Engineers, everyone that I've run into joke that they're professional Googlers. So they're looking for answers just as much as you are. And so please, on your projects, work with your teams, get as far as you can get, but ask questions. That's why we want to see it in the interview, because that's what it's going to be like on the job. You got to be able to work with your team.
Yeah, I couldn't agree. And just going back to what Vicky had shared, I think a big mistake that we see is and this is for organizations that don't have 10,000 coffees, because what happens is if they don't have a system for it, they have to just email everybody to hope to get one. Whereas with solutions like 10,000 coffees at your schools, it gives you at most schools, it's a match once every 1 or 2 months. So that you're getting the right types of quality connections, to Brandon's point, so that you can do great work, but then have networking as a way to get visible and get that work visible. Whereas other organizations who just tell students, hey, go meet everybody, is actually a huge inefficient ask, because people just start to email everyone, and that is not the goal. So we need systems to help people do those things effectively. So that that's an important one. We have another question from the audience, I think is a really good one, is we've talked about early career and students and recent grads, and what we oftentimes that gets biased towards age. And the reality is we actually haven't, on purpose, when I talk about this group, we talk about early in career, which actually might be people who are starting a new career for a second time, but might not be at that average student age per se. Because early career could be people that are going back and studying new things. And students and recent grads could be of all ages. And so a question that came in from Barb, which I think is a great one, is around, she's a recent Master of Counseling grad, but has been at home raising her 3 kids for many years, and now is in early 50s. What advice for this not so early in career employee to start that next career? And maybe Ronald, do you want to go first, and then I can pass it to Michelle?
Sure. It's not an area I've come across very often. Um, but I'll still use that analogy. So I work a lot with people with disabilities, so they might have had gaps in their career for whatever reason, whatever medical um, reason, and you know I think I do. Again, this is just one perspective. Um, you know, I encourage people to acknowledge the gap in their resume. So, if it's like, I was, um, I left the workforce to raise a family. Um, Again, not going into super detail, I'm not asking you to do that, but somehow, if you could massage a way to acknowledge that, um, and yeah, just sort of reference it so that it sort of explains the gap for the recruiter. I think a lot of companies, we're doing a lot of work behind the scenes to really encourage a sort of progressive view on a lot of things, and life is a very complex thing. Um, but there's still other inherent value, right? Even if you've worked before, and hey, raising a family and running a household and organizing everything, man, there's a lot of skills being developed there as well. Again, there's an opportunity to tell a story. So I certainly encourage that. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's just kind of my perspective on it for now.
Yeah, I can jump in too. I think I would agree with with what Ronald has said. I think it is about acknowledging it, and I think I'm reflecting on everything that we've said so far, which I think it is still 100% valid, right? In terms of what some of the tactics that you want to do, right? And I think part of it is also recognizing on the outset that like there's nothing wrong with that, right? Like that I think, recognizing that we still want to approach the way we're looking for these opportunities and being, to acknowledge and to as it was mentioned, what Ronald said, to be proud of the skills that you have been doing, whether you have shifted careers or had to take a gap, right? There was consistent learning there and other skills that you were developing. So how can you tell that story? How can you connect it to, again, potentially if it is a career change perspective, right? We talked already about soft skills, right? So how can you leverage some of those soft skills that you had from previous roles, or you've been developing from previous roles, into this new sort of area that you're going to. But I think, again, things like your resume, still highlighting some of these key points on your resume, up top is important. Maybe your resume takes a different format. I know we didn't get into like different formats of resumes, but there's other ways that, again, storytelling on a resume. But to be honest, I do think that, when it's not as an obvious of, because I know, again, I can speak to some of the roles that I've typically hired for. Dave's right? It is very like, oh, we target undergrads who are in schools and we post it at this, like it's a very linear kind of, posting process, right? Whereas that doesn't always fit with, where you're looking, or you're not part of that particular group. Doesn't mean it's not a consideration, but it does potentially mean that you might have to take an extra step because we're not going linear directly to you and posting, on a job board that's an undergraduate job board, something like that. So I actually do think that this is where things like networking becomes so much more important, right? Because you want them to see you not just on paper, which is, again, a bit of a blanket message, but you want to start making those connections where you can tell your story maybe a little bit more than just what's on a resume. Would sort of how I would position it, but I wouldn't see it as a disadvantage. It's just really, how do I position it differently? Or maybe take some of those extra steps to make sure that I've made those connections.
That's great. And I think thanks for all your answers on that. We're somehow running out of time. And so I thought, just for a last round table question, in 30 seconds, final best piece of advice or parting words that you'd give to everybody that's on the call. And maybe we'll go Vicky to Michelle, Ronald, and Brendan. 30 seconds or so, final advice, best practices, parting words. Over to you.
Okay, Dave. I actually was just looking, and this session is about that interview, and I feel like we haven't actually talked that much about the interview. So if you don't mind, I think everyone will agree with what I'm going to say is really take a look at the STAR interview model and practice that. So STAR stands for situation. So you start off, if someone asks you a behavioral question like, tell me about a time you had to overcome conflict, or tell me about a time where you showed leadership, you always start off with the situation and laying kind of the land and explaining the context. Then the T stands for task. What did you do and how did you do it? Which is A, how did you do it? The action, and then R is the result. So as we talked about, always talk about the result and have examples lined up from your previous work experiences or volunteer experiences that you can talk to through the STAR method. So a lot of times people ask me, well, do I need examples for every single behavioral question that can come up? You're not going to be able to do that. There's so many different types of questions that can come up. What you can do to prepare in advance for an interview is think about all the different examples where you had to overcome a challenge, where you had to pivot and or you didn't have all the information, where you showed leadership, where you had to communicate with different stakeholders, where you had to collaborate. Think of all these different examples. And then when someone asks you a behavioral question of, tell me about a time where you had to work with difficult coworkers, then you can look at these examples and pull one of those and then use the STAR method and go through that. If you use the STAR method throughout your entire interview, I promise you that you will ace that interview. And keep practicing. The more you practice behavioral questions and answering them with other people or just other jobs that you apply for, the better you'll get and the more confident that you'll get. So that is my very long 2-minute tip.
That was awesome. And 30 seconds, that's perfect. Do not hold yourself to it as we bounce to the next one. Thanks, Vicky.
I think I was next, Dave. I think so.
Yes.
So I'll piggyback off Vicky as well. The other questions that I would be prepared for and being able to answer, which sort of ties into my other piece of advice, is to also, as I mentioned, going into these interviews, being genuine and curious. So I think that's another message just to remember. Again, two-way conversation, but be genuine. Because again, you're interviewing for a job that you're going to, potentially, hopefully get. And so you want to make sure that it's something, speaks to your values and being genuine. But I would also be prepared for a lot of those questions that ask the why question. So there's these, what we typically call motivational questions. So these are your typical starting off questions where they ask, right? Why are you interested? Why did you apply to Loblaw? Why are you interested? Why did you take marketing as your degree? So a lot of these, there's no really right or wrong answer to them, right? It is very much about you, but it is something that, we talked a little bit about self-reflection and self-awareness, right? Is have you thought about that? And what's the story behind that of why we are here? Why are you meeting with me? Why do you want to be here? So I think that's the other piece that I would also prepare for. 100% the behavioral STAR method is key and will get you through a really good chunk of that interview. But I think it's also important to remember how to answer what some of those why questions. Why are you there? And why did you apply?
Okay, so I'll go quickly. The STAR method, excellent for interviews, but it's also good when creating your resume. It helps you frame your story. I keep saying story, story, story. The STAR method frames your story on your resume in bullet points. It organizes your mind, which will then translate into the interview. So big believer in the STAR approach for everything related to resumes and interviews. Again, I'm just reiterating some stuff. Research, research, research. Come prepared. All right. Have questions to ask back. Can't stress that enough. Sometimes you might feel like you're sort of weak when you are answering questions, but you can save yourself with some really amazing questions that you ask back. Because the recruiters will walk away and be like, man, that guy asked me a really good question. And you know what? They'll remember your name and image in their mind when they're in their final review. So don't discount yourself. Ask really good questions. And that's kind of it for me with that. Those are my closing words.
I think align with what everyone said. I think Vicky really touched base on the two things: the STAR method and preparation. Somebody had asked me in the chat, how do I apply for a role that needs 1 to 2 years of experience when I have none? The example I gave is, and so this is a little bit related, bear with me, is it takes 10,000 hours to be an expert at something, right? And so be an expert at interviewing. You can control that, and you can control it by practicing. And so the person had asked me about that. I say when a resume, when a job description says years of experience, I oftentimes just ignore that, especially at like senior levels, because if it's asking for 10 or 20 years or something, you're an expert after 5. Why does it matter if I have 7? So similarly goes for 1 to 2 years of experience. If they're recruiting at your college, they're asking for 0 to 2 years, and that's what you should be thinking about. But practice. There can't be enough practice. That's what studying is. That's how you got good at school, because you practiced. Get good at interviewing, get good at your job, and it's going to take practice. So invest in yourself, take the time.
Awesome. So we have a segue. So I know you've probably got a bit inspired from our speakers, and so we just wanted to put up just some links for all of you to be able to take a screenshot or take this away. And there's some really great opportunities across all these organizations that our panelists represent. And I can, speak firsthand for the types of experiences that all of them provide, lots of different roles. And so I encourage you all, and I think Vicky shared this at the start, but definitely, look online. I think you've heard it from everybody. Do your research on all of these organizations, and here's links to be able to do exactly that. So take a look online, bookmark it, follow them on the different social channels like LinkedIn or Twitter to stay up to date on all their opportunities. So if you ever wanted to see how you could join their amazing teams, here's the links that give you all that background. So hopefully everyone's had a chance to take a screenshot. We'll also share some of this with you as a follow-up. So what's next? We always love to get people's feedback. And I guess before I even get to the next steps, I should start all these next steps to say a huge thank you to our panelists. I know all of you are in nonstop interviews and different meetings all day, and to find an hour and a half to share it with all these people has been so helpful. So really appreciate it. Thanks so much. You're helping a lot of people get access to more career opportunities. So thanks for taking the time. So for all of the attendees, next steps, we'll be sending out a survey, and kind of a nice little surprise today is that everyone that fills out the survey will actually get a complimentary 1-year LinkedIn Learning license. So all of you will get a 1-year access, which there's tons of different courses. There's ones, I know we talked about emotional intelligence versus IQ. Well, there's courses on emotional intelligence. So fill out that survey and you'll get a LinkedIn Learning license, compliments of RBC Future Launch. Also share some of your thoughts and feedback and even photos or next steps through the social channels, which is linked. And then finally, you can, if you want some of your friends or classmates to be able to take advantage of these programs, you can go to 10,000coffees.com/schools, find your school and be able to get access. It's fully free for anyone to be able to access opportunities like this. So again, thanks to the panelists and to Denise and Elliot and all of our school career center and alumni centers for providing this to all of their students and recent grads, and have a great rest of the week.
Thank you, Dave. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Feel free to connect on LinkedIn as well.
Yes, please.
Best of luck,
Yeah,
everyone.
Thank you.
Okay.